When Lyra drove up the winding road to her late father's mountain cabin, she expected silence, maybe dust, maybe memories. Instead, children's laughter echoed through the trees, smoke curled from the chimney, and voices she recognized rang out. Her heart sank as she pushed open the door. Her relatives were inside, lounging like it was their own, drinks in hand, music playing. When she asked what they were doing there, her cousin Moyo smirked and said, "Perfect. Your cabin was just sitting here. We decided to make it our summer home." Lyra's grip tightened on the keys in her hand. They had no idea what storm they had just invited. Lyra had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. The mountain cabin was one of the last pieces of her father she still held on to. She remembered the smell of the wooden walls, the quiet mornings by the lake, and the way her father used to sit on the porch telling her stories. Driving up the winding road, she imagined stepping into a place filled with silence and memories. But as soon as she parked and stepped out, something felt wrong. She heard children laughing, music playing, and even smelled food cooking. Her heart skipped a beat. That wasn't supposed to happen. The cabin was supposed to be empty. She rushed to the front door, her chest tight with worry. As she pushed it open, the shock almost made her drop the keys in her hand. Inside, the living room was full of people. Her cousin Moyo was stretched out on the couch like he owned it, sipping a drink. Two of her other relatives were dancing, while children ran across the wooden floor she had once polished with her father. Bags and clothes were scattered everywhere, as if they had been living there for days. Lyra's mouth went dry. This wasn't a quick visit. They had settled in. When she finally found her voice and asked what they were doing there, Moyo didn't even look embarrassed. Instead, he smirked and said, "Perfect. Your cabin was just sitting here, so we decided to make it our summer home." His words cut through her like a knife. Lyra froze, staring at him, trying to understand how he could speak so casually about something that meant the world to her. This cabin wasn't just a house. It was her father's legacy, her safe place, her memory of home. The others joined in with laughter, nodding along with Moyo, as if she was the one being unreasonable for being shocked. One even joked that she never came around anyway, so what was the harm? Lyra felt her hands tremble. They didn't see the pain in her eyes, or maybe they just didn't care. They were treating her father's cabin like a holiday resort, while she stood there, feeling like a stranger in her own home. That moment of disbelief burned into her heart. What was supposed to be a peaceful return had turned into a nightmare. And as she stood in the doorway, gripping her keys tighter, she knew this wasn't just a family misunderstanding. It was the start of a battle she never expected to fight. Lyra stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her eyes moving from one face to another. She still couldn't believe what she was seeing, but before she could even ask them to leave, Moyo leaned forward with that same smug smile on his face. He waved his hand around the room like he was giving a tour and said, "Look, Lyra, this place was just sitting here, locked and lonely. You hardly ever come. Why should it go to waste when the rest of us can enjoy it?" His words made the room go quiet for a moment, but then laughter broke out among the others. It was the kind of laughter that wasn't playful. It was sharp, mocking, and meant to cut deep. One of her aunts chuckled and added, "You live in the city now, don't you? Always busy with your big job, your busy life. What do you need with a mountain cabin? Let those of us who actually come around use it." Another cousin shook his head and said loudly, "Honestly, you don't deserve it. You probably even forgot it was here." The words stung. They weren't just taking space in the cabin. They were trying to make her feel unworthy of it, like she had no right to her own father's gift. Moyo didn't stop there. He stood up, stretching his arms wide as if he owned every piece of wood in the walls. "This is the perfect place for summer," he continued proudly. "Fresh air, beautiful view, a big enough space for everyone. And since you don't bother with it, we thought, why not us? We'll take care of it better than you ever could." His voice was dripping with arrogance, and the others clapped as if he had said something wise. Lyra's face burned. She wanted to shout, to remind them all that this wasn't some abandoned cabin they could claim. It was her father's home, left to her for a reason. But instead of listening, they kept mocking. One relative whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "City people always think they're better, but she doesn't even care about family property." Another laughed and said, "If she really wanted it, she would have been here long ago." Each word was like a stone thrown at her heart. They weren't just questioning her presence. They were questioning her love for her father, her right to hold on to his memory. She looked at Moyo again, his grin wider than ever, his eyes daring her to fight back. In that moment, she realized they had already decided she didn't belong here. But deep inside, she also knew one thing: they were wrong. And soon she would prove it. Lyra stood in the center of the cabin, her chest tightening as the laughter and mocking words filled the air. She looked at the faces around her, people she had once trusted, people she had shared childhood meals and family gatherings with, and she couldn't recognize them anymore. When she opened her mouth to remind them that this was her father's place, Moyo raised his hand and spoke louder, cutting her off. "You see, everyone agrees," he said proudly. "It's only fair we use it since you're never here." And to her shock, some of the relatives nodded in agreement. An older uncle leaned back in his chair and said calmly, "Moyo is right. Why hold it all to yourself when family can enjoy it? Your father would not want the cabin locked up." Another cousin chimed in, "Exactly. This place is big enough for everyone. Why are you acting like it's only yours? Share, Lyra. Stop being selfish." Their voices felt like daggers. She wanted to scream that her father had given it to her, that it wasn't about selfishness, it was about respect. But each word they spoke drowned her voice. Not everyone spoke though. A few relatives stayed quiet, avoiding her eyes. One aunt shifted uncomfortably, as if she knew Moyo was wrong but didn't dare to speak against him. Another cousin looked down at the floor, refusing to take sides. Their silence was worse than the insults. Lyra could see in their faces that they knew the truth, but fear or convenience kept them still. It was easier for them to let her stand alone than to risk Moyo's anger. That realization broke something inside her. These were people she had grown up with, people who were supposed to protect her when she was outnumbered. Yet now, they left her stranded in the middle of the storm. Their choice to remain silent spoke louder than words. It told her she couldn't count on them. Moyo, sensing the room was bending toward him, grew bolder. He leaned against the wooden wall and smirked, saying, "See, Lyra? You're the only one making a fuss. Everyone else understands this is family property. Maybe you're too attached to your city life to understand what family means anymore." The words hit her harder than she expected. He was twisting her absence into betrayal, making her look like the outsider. Lyra's hands clenched tightly around her keys as the betrayal settled in her chest. She realized she wasn't just fighting for the cabin. She was fighting for her father's memory, alone. The people she thought would stand beside her had chosen comfort over truth. And in that moment, she knew the battle had only just begun. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Lyra sat alone in the small room that used to be her father's study. The laughter from earlier still echoed in her mind, but she refused to let it break her. She lit a small lamp and began opening the wooden chest tucked under the desk, the one her father always kept locked. Inside, she found boxes of old papers, neatly folded letters, and yellowed documents. Her hands trembled as she pulled them out, each one carrying the weight of her father's handwriting, his thoughts, his voice frozen in ink. As she read, her eyes filled with tears. In one letter, her father wrote to her directly, "Lyra, this cabin is more than walls and wood. It carries our family's history, and one day, it will carry your strength. I leave it to you because I know you will honor it." The words made her chest tighten. It wasn't just property. It was a responsibility he had trusted only her to protect. Digging deeper, she uncovered legal documents, each one stamped and signed, clearly showing her name as the rightful heir. But what struck her most was the detail her father had written in his personal notes. He explained how the cabin stood on protected land, how it was not only a family retreat but also tied to environmental preservation in the mountains. He had worked with local officials years ago to make sure it would never be sold or destroyed, and he had left it in her care so the promise would continue. Reading his words, Lyra finally understood why the cabin had always felt different. It wasn't just about memories of fishing by the lake or nights by the fire. It was about carrying forward something much bigger than herself. Her father had trusted her, not Moyo, not anyone else, because he believed she had the heart to protect it. That realization gave her a new fire in her spirit. She stacked the letters and documents carefully, making sure every piece was safe. Each word from her father was like a shield against the mocking voices she had faced earlier. They thought she was weak, that she didn't deserve the cabin, but here was proof, not just on paper but in her father's own words, that she was chosen for a reason. Closing the chest, Lyra whispered to herself that she would not let them steal what was never theirs. The cabin was not wasted, not forgotten, and certainly not abandoned. It was her father's gift, his legacy, and now, her responsibility to protect at all costs. Lyra sat on the floor of the study. The papers spread out around her, but one letter kept drawing her eyes back. It was written in her father's bold handwriting, the kind she remembered from notes he used to leave her on the kitchen table. She unfolded it slowly, and as she read, her breath caught. This cabin carries a legacy. Protect it, and it will protect you. The words seemed to echo in her mind, louder than the voices of her mocking relatives, stronger than the doubts that had been planted in her heart. She read the line again and again, trying to understand what her father had meant. A legacy? She thought about all the times he had brought her here as a child. The long hikes through the forest, the way he showed her where the river ran clear, the stories he told about their ancestors who had once walked the same land. Back then, she thought they were just father's tales to pass the time, but now she realized he had been teaching her something. The cabin wasn't only a home. It was a piece of their family's story, tied to the land and its history. As she searched the rest of the letter, she found more clues. Her father wrote about how generations before him had kept the cabin safe, each adding their own touch, but never allowing it to be sold or destroyed. He spoke of sacred traditions, how the cabin stood as a reminder of endurance, of family roots, of promises made long before Lyra was even born. It wasn't just wood and stone, it was a symbol of who they were. The warning in his words felt heavier now. Protect it and it will protect you. Lyra thought about her relatives downstairs, treating the place like a vacation house, blind to what it really meant. They couldn't see the legacy, but her father had trusted that she would. And in that moment, she understood why he had left it to her alone. It wasn't favoritism. It was trust. Trust that she would honor something much bigger than herself. Lyra pressed the letter to her chest, tears filling her eyes. She realized the fight ahead wasn't only about keeping her cabin. It was about protecting her father's legacy, her family's name, and the history written into the walls of this home. The mystery of the cabin was no longer a question. It was an answer, and it gave her strength. She knew now she could not walk away. She had to stand her ground. The next morning, Lyra walked into the living room with her father's letters and documents held tightly in her hands. She had stayed up all night reading them, and her heart felt stronger than it had the day before. The laughter and arrogance of her relatives no longer scared her. She stood tall in front of them and said clearly, "This cabin is mine. My father left it to me, and I will not allow anyone to take it. You all need to leave." Her voice was calm but firm, the kind that carried weight even in the middle of a noisy room. For a moment, the relatives froze, staring at her in surprise. Some exchanged nervous glances, but then Moyo broke the silence. He leaned back on the couch, chuckled and shook his head. "Leave," he said mockingly. "And who will make us? You? Don't act like you're stronger than the rest of us. You don't even stay here, and now you suddenly think you can order us out." His words sent ripples of laughter across the room, as if he had just won an argument. But Lyra didn't back down. She raised the papers in her hand and said, "These are my father's letters and legal deeds. Everything here proves the cabin belongs to me. You're all trespassing, and I won't let it continue." Her tone was steady, but Moyo only smirked wider. "Try and stop us then," he said coldly, his eyes locking on hers. "Call whoever you want, do whatever you like. You'll see this family will always take what it wants. You're just one person against all of us." The arrogance in his voice burned inside her, but instead of breaking her, it lit a fire. She realized Moyo had no respect for her father, or for the truth. He was daring her to fight, thinking she would back down like before. But this time, she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the frightened girl standing at the doorway anymore. She was her father's daughter, the one chosen to protect the cabin and its legacy. Lyra took a deep breath and stared back at Moyo without fear. "If you want to test me, go ahead," she said firmly. "But I promise you I won't lose." The room went quiet at her words, and for the first time, Moyo's grin flickered. He had expected her to fold under pressure, not rise against it. That moment of resistance marked the beginning of her fight, and everyone in the cabin could feel the change. Lyra knew arguing with Moyo would get her nowhere. His arrogance was too thick, and the others were too eager to follow his lead. If she wanted to win, she needed to be smarter. So while they filled the cabin with noise and laughter, she spent her time searching through every drawer, chest, and shelf. She carefully gathered all the documents her father had left behind. The original deed to the cabin, his signed letters, and old photographs showing the two of them spending summers there. Each piece of evidence was a reminder that the cabin was truly hers, not something for the family to grab when it suited them. One evening, while going through a folder tucked deep inside the chest, she came across official papers that looked different from the rest. Her father had written notes in the margins, underlining certain sentences. As she read through them, her eyes widened. The cabin wasn't just private property, it sat on protected land. Years ago, her father had worked with local authorities to ensure that the surrounding forest and lake remained untouched by illegal logging, hunting, or construction. Because of this agreement, the cabin itself was listed under environmental protection laws. That meant no one could stay there or make changes without the owner's consent. Unauthorized use wasn't just disrespectful, it was a legal offense. The realization sent a rush of relief through Lyra. She finally had something stronger than words. Her relatives could laugh at her, mock her, and call her selfish, but the law was on her side. They weren't just squatting in her cabin. They were breaking regulations that could lead to fines or worse. She remembered her father's words. Protect it, and it will protect you. For the first time, she truly understood. By safeguarding the cabin itself was now protecting her through the law he had put in place. She didn't announce her discovery right away. Instead, she carefully organized everything she had found. She placed the deed, the letters, the photographs, and the environmental documents in a neat folder. She even took pictures of them with her phone, making sure nothing could be destroyed or hidden by angry relatives later. Each page gave her more courage, each photo more confidence. Meanwhile, Moyo strutted around the cabin, believing he had already won. He bragged about how the place looked better with life in it, how he and the others would host parties every summer. The more he spoke, the more determined Lyra became. She didn't need to fight him with anger. She had proof, and proof was more powerful than his arrogance. By the time she finished her quiet work, she no longer felt alone or powerless. She had her father's legacy in writing, and she had the law standing behind her. All that was left was the right moment to show Moyo and the others what they had walked into. The game was about to change, and this time, it would not be in their favor. The tension had been building for days, and finally, it reached its breaking point. Moyo called a family gathering inside the cabin, thinking it would give him a chance to show everyone that he was in control. The room was crowded with relatives, some sitting with smug smiles, others whispering quietly as if they weren't sure which side to stand on. Lyra walked in carrying a folder close to her chest, her eyes calm but steady. She waited until the noise died down, then laid the papers on the table. "I have something to show you," she said, her voice firm. Moyo leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "What could you possibly show us that changes anything? This cabin belongs to the family now. You're just being dramatic." The others chuckled, but their laughter faded when Lyra spread out the documents. Her father's signed deed, his letters, and the photographs of him and her together at the cabin through the years. Then she placed down the papers that revealed the environmental protection status. The room fell silent as she explained, step by step, how the cabin had been legally entrusted to her, and how their occupation wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. Some relatives shifted in their seats, uneasy with her calm confidence. Moyo tried to laugh it off, waving his hand dismissively. "These are just old papers. No one cares about them anymore." But just as he spoke, there was a knock at the door. When it opened, 2 local officials stepped inside. Lyra had called them earlier, and now they stood with authority, ready to confirm the truth. The officials inspected the documents carefully, nodding as they read. One of them turned to the family and said clearly, "This cabin is legally owned by Lyra. Any unauthorized stay here is trespassing and violates protection laws. If you refuse to leave, there will be legal consequences." The words cut through the room like a blade. Gasps filled the air, and suddenly the relatives who had mocked Lyra began whispering in panic. One aunt quickly stood up, saying she didn't know the situation was this serious. Another cousin muttered that they had only come because Moyo insisted. Eyes turned toward him, the very man who had led them into this mess. His grin faded as the weight of the official's words sank in. Lyra stood silently, watching the shift happen. For once she didn't need to argue. The truth was laid bare, and the law was standing beside her. The relatives who had once laughed at her now looked uneasy and ashamed. Moyo, trapped in his own arrogance, could no longer hide behind mocking words. The power had turned, and everyone in the room knew it. The moment the officials left, the cabin no longer felt loud and full of confidence. It felt heavy, almost suffocating. The relatives who had been laughing earlier now stared at Moyo with narrowed eyes. The same people who had clapped for him when he declared the cabin theirs were suddenly quiet, and then the whispers began. One uncle shook his head in frustration and said, "Moyo, you told us it was fine to be here. You swore no one would care." His words cut through the silence, and soon others joined in. An aunt pointed at him angrily. "You dragged us here, made us believe it was family property. Do you know what could have happened if the officials had decided to press charges? We could have been fined. We could have ended up in court." Another cousin, who had laughed the loudest before, now looked disgusted. "All this was just your pride. You wanted to act like a big man, and now you've put all of us in trouble." Moyo tried to defend himself. He raised his hands and said, "I was only trying to make use of the place. Lyra doesn't even live here. I thought it would be better for everyone if we stayed." But no one was willing to hear his excuses anymore. His words sounded weak, even to his own ears. The relatives who had mocked Lyra now mocked him, calling him foolish, reckless, and arrogant. Lyra stood quietly in the corner, watching the same people who had turned against her now turn on him. She didn't need to say anything. The shift was clear. His bravado, once so loud, was crumbling in front of everyone. He tried to smile, to keep his usual confident look, but the shame in his eyes betrayed him. The room no longer respected him. They blamed him for everything. One relative muttered, "You've embarrassed the whole family," and another added, "All because you wanted to play boss." Moyo lowered his head, the weight of their anger pressing on him. For the first time, he had no clever remark, no sarcastic laugh. He looked trapped, cornered by the very people who had once cheered him on. His pride, the thing he had carried so boldly, had shattered in a single evening. Lyra could see it in the slump of his shoulders and the silence that followed him. The man who had dared her to try and stop him was now stripped of his power. His reputation, once untouchable among the relatives, was ruined. And as he sat there, avoiding everyone's eyes, it became clear, Moyo had lost and everyone knew it. The room was still tense, but Lyra's voice cut through the silence like a blade. She stepped forward, her eyes steady, her hands holding the keys to the cabin. "This cabin is not wasted," she said, her words calm yet powerful. "It is a legacy and I will honor it. You tried to steal memories that were never yours. Now you will remember me as the one who stood her ground." Her tone left no space for argument. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their heads, others glaring at Moyo, who could not meet anyone's eyes. No one spoke back. The confidence they had carried when they mocked her was gone. Their voices, once loud, were drowned by the weight of their own shame. One by one, they picked up their things, avoiding her gaze as they shuffled toward the door. The sound of their footsteps leaving the cabin felt like the ending of a storm. Moyo lingered the longest, his pride in pieces. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words never came. His silence said more than any excuse could. With his shoulders heavy, he followed the rest of the family outside, not daring to look back. When the last door shut behind them, Lyra turned the key and locked it firmly. For the first time in a long while the cabin felt safe again. The walls seemed to breathe with her, carrying the strength of her father's memory. She placed her hand on the wooden door and whispered softly to herself, "This is yours, Papa, and I will protect it." A deep calm settled in her chest. She was no longer the quiet daughter they thought they could silence. She had defended not only the cabin but her own dignity. The relatives could leave with their shame. That was their burden to carry. For Lyra, there was peace. The gift her father left was secure, and so was her heart. That night, she sat by the window inside the cabin, the keys on the table beside her. The moonlight spilled across the floor, and for the first time, she felt the cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was strength, memory, and love. She had stood her ground, and in doing so, she had honored her father. The fight was over, and she had won.